No data, no problem. Zabu allows you to buy or sell securities on the Altex exchange from anywhere in Uganda via USSD. Step 1. To buy, dial *292#. Step 2. Select buy. Step 3. Select the product you would like to buy. For example, bonds. Step 4. Select your preferred maturity year. Step 5. Select the bond you would like to buy. Step 6. Input an amount of 15,000 Ugandan shillings or more. Step 7. Your order has been forwarded for processing. And finally, Step 8. Your order.
Fresh, eh? Good morning and welcome again to Smart Means Business. It's a beautiful Tuesday morning. I hope you're all very, very well rested. It's a good day. I saw in the morning there wasn't too much jam on the roads, so I'm hoping that everyone is good, because yesterday the rain was incredibly high. As you know, the monsoon is definitely coming in and out. But yes, well, the weather is good, the roads are clear, so I hope you're all on your way to the morning and enjoying your day. Today we have very interesting topics that we're going to discuss, especially considering we have an amazing guest coming on later on with our host Jen Kasumba. That's basically a presidential candidate that's basically going to talk about a lot of things. And today we're going to discuss, of course, the relationship between politics and economics and the development of the country, and how that has played, how politics and business have played a key role in the development of the country. We have very interesting topics that we're going to get into today, right? So obviously, looking at the historical context, we see that the relationship between business and politics in Uganda has been complex and intertwined, as we know, right? So we see, on the one hand, the government has played a significant role in promoting economic growth, according to this article, and development. It has invested in infrastructure, such as the roads and power, right? But if you look at the historical context, obviously back in the day we had the Indians coming in with economic boom, with a lot of shops here, and eventually they had to leave. That was under Idi Amin's regime. But over time we've seen that has changed, and we're starting to see how the business and economics how the politics and economics have started to intertwine in their own unique way. Of course, when Museveni came in around 1987, we're able to see a relationship with agriculture, a relationship with business start to bloom and to grow, especially with our infrastructure systems, right? Where we start to see a lot of the privatization of business starting to boom in the country along that time. So a lot has changed. So we see here that obviously, on the other hand, the government has also been accused of corruption and favoritism towards certain businesses. As you know, historically in Uganda, being a country that has over 30 tribes with 30 different regions, there's that accusation that some tribes and some regions get a little more favoritism as compared to other areas. So it's one thing that is a constant conversation, because we're thinking, if you look at other regions in Africa, of course in Uganda, we look at West Africa, West Uganda, Western Uganda. A lot of people accuse, of course, our dear president of having more attention towards the area in terms of infrastructure. Because if you go to Mbara, if you go to Hoima, you look at the roads and they're beautiful, right? They're amazing clear roads, whereas different parts of the country don't have that same treatment. So we always, the president, of course the government has been accused of at least providing favoritism to certain areas as opposed to others. So we see there's more development in certain tribes. There's that favoritism, there's nepotism, because you know who is in the government. There tends to be historically a lot of more people hired with that same tribe as the president or as a majority in government. So that's just one of the accusations that have been out there. And we also start to see here some specific examples of how business and politics have intersected in Uganda. We're starting to see here the government has awarded contracts to companies owned by or affiliated with government officials, as we see that, right? So this has led to allegations of corruption and favoritism. So we see that a lot of family members that are in government, that are in power, tend to favor their own people and provide them the contracts, provide them the leeways. There's not enough checks and balances provided for some of those businesses. So you find a lot of other businesses from different people that are not affiliated with the government suffer more, and they start to struggle a little bit because they're thinking, I need to pay someone, I need to know someone that knows someone. I mean, there's that common saying that when you graduate in Uganda with a first-class honors, it's almost like it's a question of, am I actually going to get the job on merit, or do I actually have to know someone that knows someone? So these are some of the things that where the government has affected development, how it has affected business, how it has affected the economics of the country, because there's those checks and balances that are missing, especially regarding favoritism and corruption. People tend to pay over the counter or under the counter to get their building cleared, or under the counter to get their product cleared without proper checks and balances. So we find there's not enough of that who is checking who, because someone's paid enough money to be able to go across the line, which isn't very fair. So we find those are some of the disadvantages of the government intervening with politics, so the government intervening with business, or politics intervening with business. So we also see here the government has used its regulatory powers to benefit certain businesses and harm their competitors. So we see here, for example, the government has banned the importation of certain goods that are produced by domestic companies. So we see that if there's importation of goods produced by certain companies, there's a ban, right? And then we're seeing here the government, of course, has used its influence to pressure businesses to donate money, right? Donate money to the ruling party or to support the government-sponsored businesses. So we find that a lot of businesses struggle because, especially when elections are coming up, or when there's new government officials being elected, you know, there's that issue where a lot of other small businesses are pressured to sort of put some money towards someone's election, put some money towards their, you know, their parties. So it makes it much easier so that when the person is in power, they know that they're going to get a lot more favors done for them. This is something that is such a big problem in the country as we speak, because we find that, you know, there's that corruption that tends to happen with certain businesses, knowing that they have to pay some of the money, some of the overheads that they might not even be able to afford, but because they know that they need the support of the government, they have to put some money forward, and that's the corruption we are talking about. It completely stifles the development of the economy. It stifles the development of the country in many, many, many ways. And we also see here that, of course, the intersection of business and politics in Uganda has had a number of its consequences. On the other hand, it has also helped to promote economic growth and development. So we see, however, it has also led to many things like corruption, as we've talked about. So in the recent years, the Ugandan government has taken some steps to improve the business environment. Of course, since 1987, when Museveni came in, we've seen a lot of steps that have helped to improve. There's a lot of steps that have taken us aback, but there's a lot of improvement as well, right? So we see here, for example, it has established a one-stop shop for starting a business and has streamlined the customs process. So we find that the custom process, especially for local businesses and international businesses, is much easier for domestic businesses. There's not enough, there's not much of a hurdle for the customs, right? It's much easier for them to transport and import their goods within the country at customs, right? And we see, however, more needs to be done to address the corruption and favoritism. Again, this is something that is emphasized in the article, is the intense corruption, favoritism, and nepotism that we struggle with as a country, especially because, you know, a lot of different tribes, a lot of different people in power tend to go against the line, right? And oversee the checks and balances because someone has paid them some money, or because they know our relatives, and it makes it easy for them. So a lot of those are things that we struggle with as a country. And we see here that, of course, overall, the relationship between business and politics in Uganda is complex and intertwined, and of course has played a significant role in the economic growth. This has created an uneven playing field for businesses and made it difficult for some companies to compete as well. Of course, that's one of the ways in which the business landscape is completely affected in the country, especially with the favoritism, is it doesn't make it favorable for other companies to compete. So you find that someone who's put their heart and sweat and tears into a product, into the product in building, isn't given as much favorable treatment as a person who simply has a relative in power, or who has simply paid more money to the officials to make sure they have more favorable competition in the economy. It makes it very difficult for other small businesses to compete. It makes it difficult for other businesses that don't have as much of that say to be able to compete, which is really, really difficult for the country. And we also see that, of course, as the government continues to grow, the intersectionality of that allows, in Uganda's historical context, has played a significant role, of course, in influencing and controlling the key sectors. So the key sectors here, this has led to a system where political connections and networks are important for businesses to thrive and succeed. So we find that because of these political connections, we find that businesses can't just come in without having to have a connection in government, without having to have a connection in power, or without having to have a relative in power. So you find a lot of businesses have to have their budget almost set aside for these businesses, for these political leaders, right? Because they're thinking, if I don't have enough money for this political leader, then my business might not be able to thrive or succeed in this climate, on this economy. So that is detriment. It's a huge detriment for growth and for business. It's a huge detriment for the bolstering of our businesses in the economy, as we continue to see. Then, of course, in a historical context, businesses seeking favorable treatment or seeking to expand their operations often engage in political lobbying. Can you imagine that? Or align themselves with influential politicians. So you find a lot of these businesses have to engage in political lobbying. So you find there's a bunch of businesses lobbying for that endorsement by that government, right? By that endorsement from that leader. So there's a lot of lobbying that happens. So a lot of companies have to align themselves with political leaders, which is not favorable for businesses. You know how they say there's a separation of church and state? I believe there should be some sort of separation between the politics and business in some way, because if politics is influencing business, then there's not enough room for the economy to grow. Right? Because we're only thinking about just getting by. We're not thinking about developing in the best way. We're not thinking about growing our product in the very best way, because we're only thinking about aligning ourselves with politicians so we can go ahead. And that is not fair. It doesn't create a favorable competition. It doesn't create merit. So people struggle to come up. We find that young businesses aren't sponsored. For example, I was at the Uganda Trade Fair recently, and I was thinking about all these young entrepreneurs, young businesses that don't have that endorsement, that don't have the government funding, that don't have the government support, because some other business who has a little bit of funding to be able to bribe the government officials are able to get ahead. What about the young entrepreneurs? What about the SMCs? All these businesses that need to grow. We are not developing them enough. We are not funding these young entrepreneurs. We're not creating spaces for them. Because guess what? It's hard for them to compete. They don't have enough of that funding to be able to bribe an official to get ahead, to be able to bribe an official to get their trading license, to get their certificates of incorporation, to get all this documentation that they might need. So you find a lot of young businesses now are lacking in a lot of the documentation they may need, because they don't have the funding to be able to cater for all of that. And last week we talked about the microfinance or institutions and how they're able to help young women that don't have access to traditional banking systems, that don't have access to traditional loans. We're able to find that the young sort of microfinance businesses are able to support and finance those people that have no access to funding, that have no access to traditional banking systems. So we find that the younger businesses now don't have that access as well because of that. You see that? So there's not enough of that area or energy for young businesses to thrive and grow. So because of that lack of competition, we find that the economy is still lacking and is still set behind because of the interference of government and politics in our economics. We're going to have a lot more of this conversation of the intersectionality between the politics, between the government and business, and how it has affected the economy. This conversation is going to continue all the way through the day, and we're going to have a few special guests coming in. But for now, we're going into our press release. Short break. Welcome back, and now we're getting into our press review. We have very interesting topics today here in the Daily Monitor as well as the New Vision. So we're seeing here tenders over 100 deals at Nation Media Group, Uganda, UNHCR, Bank of Uganda, NMISS, NOC, LDC and ETC. So if you're looking for all the different tenders, the different offers are in the Daily Monitor. Please check that out in today's newspaper. So we're seeing here government to roll out new injectable HIV drug. So we're seeing here the long-lasting injectable Cobotagravil, CABLA, has been confirmed to be effective and is being considered as a key to national efforts to reduce the health burden of HIV/AIDS, which claimed 70,000 lives in Uganda just last year. So we're seeing here, of course, we're seeing in the New Vision, in the national news still, the Monitor, Bugembe Cathedral host of Busoga Royal Wedding. So we're seeing here that Reverend Canon David Munobwa, the assistant vicar at Christ Cathedral in Bugembe, Jinja North City Division, says Chabazinga William Kabule Nadiope IV will be the first monarch to wed inside the 50-year-old church. That is interesting, right? For the Busoga Church. And also we're seeing in the Daily Monitor, Among Magogo gets twin sons. I think that's very good news for her. So she says, Parliament, the Speaker of Parliament, Anita Among, and her husband, Budiope, is Member of Parliament, Moses Hassim Magogo, have welcomed the birth of their twins, with fellow MPs receiving the good tidings with much joy and excitement. Let's go over here to the New Vision and see what is happening. So we're seeing here, business fails to avail plans designed for the works. So we're seeing here Tycoon building on Lugogo Water Channel halted. I mean, it's interesting if you look at the New Vision this morning, as you can see here, there's a lot of flooding that's been happening because of the crazy rains. I know yesterday the rains were very intense. We talked about the monsoons that are predicted, monsoons that are happening since last month, but we're seeing here that this is halting business of any kind. Because of the heavy flooding, there's a lot of halted business that's happening in Uganda. However, there's still some people, some tycoons, that are still trying to oversee that. Remember we talked about the checks and balances earlier, how the government may interfere with business. So we're seeing here, because there's a wealthy tycoon who was trying to try to build in an area where there's flooding. He thought because he has enough money, he can pay for that and still build in an area that is not allowed to be built in. So that's where we're talking about. So we're seeing here best and worst districts for mothers have been named. So we're seeing here the number of women who die while giving birth has increased according to the Health Ministry, writes Agnes Chotalengerire. So the Ministry of Health has identified the districts of Hoima, Mbale, Gulu, Mtoroko, Kayunga, Fort Portal, Mbarara, Kisoro, Lira, Jinja, and Sorority as lagging behind in the battle to end maternal deaths. Right, so we're seeing here as well, in other news, government gives out high-value seedlings to boost household incomes. So by the year 2030, Vas avocado is expected to be Uganda's leading foreign exchange earning crop, as it is expected to bring 3.7 billion shillings in government. Can you imagine that? So we also see as well, PDM should not leave you the same, First Lady exclaims. So invest money wisely. Mrs. Museveni advised the beneficiaries not to squander the 1 million that they have been loaned from PRF, but to wisely choose the enterprises to invest in and then work towards transforming their households. So she quotes, enterprise selection is key. Please invest your money in profitable enterprises and reinvest your profits in that one enterprise before rushing to diversify into several enterprises at a go. So obviously the president is Mrs. Museveni is telling us that we should be able to invest carefully, not just invest, diversify, but also invest carefully. We need to get that one business and really fully invest in it before we start to diversify our portfolio. So we're seeing here that government-owned enterprises post profit of Shees. Could you hear me? So government-owned enterprises post profit of Shees 115 billion Uganda shillings. So we're seeing here, Mwanga said, whereas the government owns shares in a number of public corporations and state enterprises which are independently managed and are supposed to operate efficiently to make profits and pay dividends to it. So we see here only a handful of them do that. He added that the government consolidated summary statement of the financial performing of public corporations and state enterprises only reports on shareholding, total income, total expenditure, dividends declared, retained earnings, and net worth of entities. So he quotes, "This prompted me to compute these ratios using audited financial statements for further analysis of their performance," he said. So we also see here in other news in the New Vision, Burundi First Lady visits Entebbe Children's Surgical Hospital. So we see here the First Lady of Burundi, yes, Her Excellency Angeline Jashimie yesterday paid a courtesy call on President Museveni at State House Entebbe. In a meeting that was also attended by the First Lady and Minister of Education and Sports, Mrs. Janet Museveni, the President welcomed Jayishime to Uganda and thanked her for the kind visit. Jayishime extended her appreciation to President Museveni for his warm welcome and the great hospitality accorded to her. You can also check that out and more in the New Vision this morning. So as we look again in the Daily Monitor, let's see what we could have missed in the highlights. So we see here how heavy trucks illegally use Katonga Bridge at night. We see here that Suleiman Kasumba is a Fuso truck driver regularly transporting bananas from southwestern Uganda to Kampala City. When River Katonga Bridge on Barra Masaka Kampala Highway in Mpigi district got damaged on May 11th, Kasumba, like other motorists, started using the Masaka, Sembabule, Kanoni Mpigi route. But because the diversion route is longer and consumes more fuel, Kasumba says sometimes last month, a fellow hauler revealed to him that he can use Katonga Bridge and save time. So we see that, and also some fuel provided. He can pay some money to security personnel managing the bridge. That's interesting news over there. So we're seeing, of course, continuing with the story about the government injectable of the HIV drug. So government to roll out injectable HIV drug. So we see the drug was cleared by the World Health Organization after studies showed it is safe and effective in preventing HIV infection. So in less than 3 months, Uganda is expected to join 3 other African countries where an injectable drug has been approved for HIV and AIDS prevention. So news of the significant development was revealed yesterday by the Uganda AIDS Commission, hailing it as an effective, safe and more user-friendly disease prevention measure compared to existing options. That is very interesting that we're going to be having more injectable HIV prevention drugs. I wonder how many of you guys are going to be able to take on that injectable. Hopefully you're not too afraid of needles. Yeah? Okay, so we're seeing here Nakalema rolls up sleeves to protect local investors. So of course, she says high taxes on SMEs and high interest rates are frustrating the investments. As we see here, the head of State House Investors Protection Unit, Kano Edith Nakalema, yesterday summoned several departments and agencies as well as financial institutions to provide answers to queries raised by small and medium enterprises. So because of that, SMEs claim their efforts on investment are being frustrated. So of course, speaking at a meeting that she convened at office of the Prime Minister's Conference Hall, Nakalema alleged high taxes on SMEs, the high interest rates charged by the commercial banks, and the high cost of standard products for exports, among other challenges, were reported in her office. As you can check out that in the national news in the New Vision. Of course, as we finalize some of the news that's happening here, we see here that right now it's 25 minutes past 7, but as we finalize here, we see established fish factory in Teso, Emorimo tells government. Of course, so the Iteso cultural leader has called on the government to establish a fish processing factory in Teso. Emorimo polled Sunday Emolot. Emotaleng will celebrating his first coronation anniversary in Soroti town on Sunday under the theme Revamping Teso Agriculture Production and Food Security. Say the factory will boost the fishing sector and add value as well as provide the market for aquatic products. So you can check all of that out in the news today in the Daily Monitor as well as the New Vision. We're definitely going to take a very small break and we shall be back with the news happening in East Africa with Karibu East Africa. So let's take a small break and we'll continue. As being in Zabo.